You've spoken to firearms officers since this incident. What did they tell you?
That officer obviously didn't know his role. He snapped. Whatever reason. I mean, we don't know what led up to him having to tase that individual. And then what he should have done is handcuff the person, let them sit up, take them away. But he then tasered him, and as he moved his head, kicked him, and as he saw. And it just shows that if people don't know their role, they can easily overstep the mark.
Could he have, at any point in that incident, the officer, have thought that man was armed?
Well, they always have to think that, but there was nothing to suggest that anyone was armed. In fact, they already had their tasers, so they'd already done their assessment, and then he's a contact person for literally the contact person, and there was the observation officers to make sure that no one does brandish a weapon of one form or another. But the fact that he was so disproportionate and unnecessary, and
what if he thought that one of these men was going to grab his gun?
Well, he was nowhere near it. The really strange thing is, he went down after he's kicked him, he went down with his knee. So if someone was going to grab a gun, he's actually put himself in that proximity. And then, obviously, he then moves on to someone else and kicks someone and hits them on the back of the head.
Andy Burnham has said this context here. He says that he's seen all the video, which many of us haven't. He says it's a fast escalating situation. These are armed police in an airport who 24/7 are on a heightened state of alert. So they're operating, aren't they, to a different standard than police on the street. Is that important context?
Well, obviously the stress level and the alertness, they have to be fully on. But in terms of a different standard, no. They should be even better at keeping their heads, because they have a lot more training in the recruitment phase, all the reviews they have to go through, psychometric testing, all sorts of attitudinal
Well, there is
tests.
a culture within these units.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. You can have as much training as you want, but if the culture is so strong, and in these elite units, as they like to call themselves, there is a subculture, and a lot of it can be around, we're in control, we escalate things, and we go in. Now, the majority of armed officers are really excellent. I've worked with them. I've even spoken to them over the last day or so. And, they know that things can escalate, but you've got to keep within the realms of your legal powers, and you have to show that professionalism. Kicking someone in the face is not a police officer's role.
Before we bring in Ahmad, what do you know about the culture of Greater Manchester Police specifically?
Well, GMP has got similar themes to the Met. It's a municipal force. It has got this institutional arrogance in a lot of ways because of their special responsibilities they have in their geographical areas. And unfortunately, they are in similar state special measures, or they're going out of it, but they still have some real issues around the culture. The culture is the real thing that fuels so many good things, but some negative things. And if you don't have the checks and balances like the sergeants and inspectors to hold these officers to account, that's when you'll see problems. And we've seen that with Carrick, with Sarah Everard, and cousins who murdered Sarah Everard. All these sort of things is where you have these tight units, and they're not exposed to the accountability like general patrol officers.
Come back to that in a second. Anwar, there was concern that the initial statement from Greater Manchester Police was not good enough.
It was awful.
Have you been reassured by what you've heard today?
No, absolutely not, because what Greater Manchester Police has done in the immediate aftermath is something that the police service in the whole of the United Kingdom always does, after normally a death in custody, whereby they spin a narrative, they produce what they claim to be facts, and then it takes several years to find out it's untruth. We should never forget that John Charles Menzies, who was shot dead, executed on a London tube, Stockwell tube, after 7/7, we were told by the police at the time he vaulted over the ticket tube, the tickets entry station in the tube station, and it turned out several years later to be untrue. We found out from over the death of Chris Cabba that we were told that he had a screwdriver. Ultimately, we found out that it wasn't true. We saw it in the death of Sheikh Ubayo, a public inquiry that I'm involved with, that some 9 years ago. In the immediate aftermath, we were told police officer had been stabbed, the policewoman had been stabbed, that when the police arrived he was armed. Several years later we find out that wasn't true. So what they do is they spin a narrative, they produce the facts, and then they tell everyone to be silent because they said they are cooperating with an independent investigation. But what they've already done is sought to criminalise and to smear. I'm disappointed in the Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, coming out and saying he's seen the whole context. There is no context, and I agree with everything that Leroy just said. There is no context for a man who is lying incapacitated on the ground for a trained police officer, precision thinking, precision skills. You know, they are individuals who have to take split-second decisions. They're not supposed to be provoked.
No, but what Andy Burnham is saying,
running at a man on the ground, kicking him on the head, and then stamping on it. That was illegitimate. It was disproportionate. There was no requirement. But there is absolutely no justification for that, and we shouldn't forget.
But hang on,
Greater Manchester Police.
Just let me bring this point in. Andy Burnham said that both sides have questions to answer here. Notwithstanding the police response, which you've talked about, there is no excuse, is there, for hitting a policewoman and breaking her nose?
I think what we need to do is to separate that completely off. If individuals,
it's relevant to what we're talking about in the context.
answering your question. If individuals break the law, then the police are required to use reasonable and legitimate force in order to arrest those individuals and detain them. Once somebody is incapacitated and on the ground, there is no requirement in law, there is no justification in law to use lethal force on that individual. So that's the first point. It's not a question of comparing like two claimed. These were individuals who were trained. They are armed. They had the man on the ground. I don't know the context beforehand. It's entirely irrelevant. If that man dies, he has a cyst on the brain, then I have to say this. If that individual used that violence and wasn't wearing a uniform and didn't have the powers and the weapons and the guns, he would be sitting in prison right now, probably charged with attempted murder.
He was suspended.
He was suspended.
They've good investigation. They've referred themselves to the IOPC. What could they do further then that would satisfy the community, that would satisfy you?
It's not a question of satisfying me, all right? It's not about me. It's a question of, as Leroy has said, there is a culture of impunity in this country. This is, after all, Greater Manchester Police that only a week ago, Vera Bade, King Counsel, said that there was individuals who are vulnerable women who were victims of trafficking, sexual trafficking, victims of domestic violence, who were unlawfully strip searched. We have a culture of impunity that allowed individuals like Wayne Couzens to walk the streets carrying a weapon, where police officers referred to him, nicknamed him the rapist, and he was able to kill. So what I would say is, not just suspension, police officers should be separated. It's not just one officer. I didn't see any other officers intervene to assist at that young man at that time to stop this going on. That's the first thing. The force was unnecessary. I've never seen police officers intervene or come to the rescue of individuals who are members of the public. The man did not deserve that attention.
Well, Greater Manchester,
arrest the individual.
Greater Manchester Police have said they have zero tolerance for this kind of behaviour, and they have suspended the officer in charge. I want to play you, Leroy, if I could, what Lee Anderson, the Reform MP, said today. Have a listen.